and the Midwest. As of this morning, more than 40 innocent lives have been lost, and many communities have been totally destroyed. The president has been actively monitoring the situation, and the Trump administration is engaged with governors and local officials to restore affected communities and livelihoods. Everyone impacted is in our prayers, and President Trump is fully prepared to assist state and local officials as they recover from the horrific damage. The president has had a very busy weekend, making our country and the world a much safer place. President Trump ordered decisive military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. These Houthi terrorists have engaged in piracy, violence, and terrorism against American ships for years under the Biden administration, costing billions of dollars and putting innocent lives at risk. Joe Biden's pathetic weakness invited these unacceptable
the strikes on the Houthis.
But there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Donald Trump. And the world is officially on notice. America has a commander-in-chief whose peace-through-strength approach is unwavering and should not be tested. As the president said, no terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing throughout the world. Houthi terrorists and their Iranian backers should not cross President Trump again, and the president has made that clear today. On another important matter, President Trump signed a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by the foreign terrorist organization Tren de Aragua. At the president's direction, the Department of Homeland Security carried out a counter-terrorism operation deporting nearly 200 violent Tren de Aragua terrorists, which will save countless American lives.
Yeah, they deported, I think it was like 238 people
These heinous monsters
to El Salvador.
Were extracted and removed to El Salvador, where they will no longer be able to pose any threats to the American public. Tren de Aragua is one of the most ruthless terrorist gangs in the world, and they are responsible for some of the most heinous crimes that have occurred in our nation's history in recent years, including the savage murders of beautiful Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungray. President Trump promised Laken and Jocelyn's families during his campaign that he would demand justice for their beautiful girls, and that's exactly what he did. As the president acknowledged during his inaugural address on January 20th, he pledged to invoke this act, and he has no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions. President Trump will continue his historic efforts to seal the border and prevent these illegal invaders from coming here in the first place.
Appreciate that, Robert.
As the New York Times is acknowledged over the weekend, President Trump's policies are working.
Leatherneck, what's up, man?
Here's how the Times summed it up. Illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border are down to their lowest level in decades. Once crowded migrant shelters are empty. Instead of heading north, people stranded in Mexico are starting to return home in bigger numbers. The border is almost unrecognizable from just a couple of years ago when hundreds of thousands of people from around the world were crossing into the United States every month in scenes of chaos.
What are the odds they come back? I don't know.
This is the Trump effect.
I mean, if they want to, they can,
again,
but
those are the words from the
it's going to be a lot harder to get in now.
We didn't need a border security bill. We just needed President Trump.
What's up, Cory Butler? How's it going?
All of these actions taken together are contributing to a wave of optimism about the direction of our great country.
Time to buy some chickens.
According to brand new polling from NBC News,
drive your costs down with some chickens.
More registered voters say the United States is heading in the right direction than at any point since early 2004. Americans support President Trump's common sense approach that's getting our country back on track in record time. Meanwhile, the president's critics can't say the same. That same new NBC poll also found that the Democrat Party has reached an all-time low in popularity. It turns out,
forget the eggs. I just want my shamrock shake.
Get in the way of doing what is best for America. The people
shamrock shakes.
Who would have thought? Joining us today in our new media seat is Kelly Meyer. She is a White House correspondent with News Nation. News Nation started in 2021 and is one of America's fastest growing cable news networks with a focus on news for all of America. It's part of a larger ecosystem, Nexstar, which is home to News Nation, the political website The Hill, the broadcast network The CW, and local Nexstar stations. With that, kick us off, please, Kelly.
Thank you, Caroline. What do you say to Americans who want safe streets but are concerned due process is being violated?
The president is using every lever of his executive authority and his constitutional authority within the bounds of the immigration laws of our country to ensure that our streets are safer for law-abiding American citizens. And this administration is focused on detaining, arresting, and deporting illegal criminal aliens. And as you saw this past weekend, the president used his authority under the Alien Enemies Act to deport foreign terrorists. Tren de Aragua is now a designated foreign terrorist organization. And as I said, there were nearly 200 Tren de Aragua members who were sent to El Salvador this weekend. Countless lives will be saved because of this action. And if you talk to the families, the Angel families, as I mentioned, Blake and Riley and Jocelyn Nungray, they understand the grave cost of life at the hands of these illegal terrorists. And the president is proud to deliver on that promise for them.
And just to follow up on
Haven't decided on the game just yet, but we'll figure it out.
Does the president, does this allow him to defy the court order without having this the checks and balances and the separation of power?
No. In fact, this administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority
the most realistic combat game? I don't know.
Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that, and we are wholly confident that we are going to win this case in court. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. If you guys can't send 200 Tren de Aragua terrorists at a time to El Salvador, where are you going to send them instead?
It's a very good question. You'd have to ask the courts and the people on the left who are trying to fight this administration for doing the business that this president sought out to do, which is to deport these foreign terrorists. And we're very grateful to President Bukele and to El Salvador for accepting these heinous monsters where they will face justice.
And if these guys are terrorists at war with the United States, is President Trump considering anything more lethal to address them than just sticking them on a plane somewhere else?
Well, it sounded like you had a little bit
I
of
heard Hell Let Loose
in
was pretty
premise
good
of your question, so I want to address it. These are designated foreign terrorists. The president signed a proclamation on February 20th, 2025, designating TDA as a foreign terrorist organization that was in consultation with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Treasury. That was pursuant to 8 U.S. Code 1189. The president has the right to do that. And I think nobody would argue that Tren de Aragua should be designated a foreign terrorist organization. If you want to have that argument, I'm happy to do it. These are heinous monsters, rapists, murderers, kidnappers, sexual assaulters, predators who have no right to be in this country, and they must be held accountable.
And something different. There is now a member of the European Parliament from France who does not think the U.S. represents the values of the Statue of Liberty anymore.
Oh, yeah. So in case you guys didn't know, I made a video about it earlier today, but there's this parliament member in France that's calling for the U.S. to give back the Statue of Liberty because he believes that the Statue of Liberty, like the U.S. no longer represents the values and morals that the Statue of Liberty is supposed to represent. That being said, it was a gift. And also this is just coming from one guy. It was likely a member of parliament that's just trying to... what's going on, Evan? This is just likely a guy in parliament that's looking for clicks because, I mean, he's just one person. That one guy doesn't represent all of France or all of the French people. I mean, I've worked with a lot of guys from France, and the French were always super nice, super cordial, very welcoming. Like, they were always very nice to me every time I've interacted with them. So you have to remember, like, this, like, life is super nuanced, and just because one guy is saying something that's like inflammatory sounding doesn't necessarily mean that the entirety of all of that population of that country feels the same way that person does, you know. And the same could be said of the United States. Like, just because one member of Congress or the Senate says one thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that every person in America feels the same way, or, you know what I mean? So just kind of a caveat just for, you know, because life, like I said, life is nuanced. And it's not, you know, what's going on, Galactic Cactus? Yeah, just good to keep in mind that life is nuanced.
They want the Statue of Liberty back. So is President Trump going to send the Statue of Liberty back to France?
Obviously, he's not going to send the Statue of Liberty back. And obviously, this isn't like a serious thing that they're like, hey, considering this, or like, hey, this isn't like all of France united saying, give us back the Statue of Liberty. That's not the case. It's just one guy, and he said it because he knows it's super inflammatory, and it's going to get clicks, and it's going to get, it's going to get engagement because it's a crazy thing to say. And you just have to remember that's not what most of the French people feel like, and that he doesn't necessarily represent all of the way that everybody feels over there. The same way that nobody over here in America that speaks necessarily represents every single person, or exactly how everybody feels, because not everybody agrees with everything that everyone says. Oh no, whoops.
It's only because of the United States of America that the
Parliament from France,
Yeah.
who does not think the U.S. represents the values of the Statue of Liberty anymore. They want the Statue of Liberty back. So is President
Appreciate the
Trump
Galactic
going
Cactus.
to send the Statue of Liberty back to France?
Absolutely not. And my advice to that unnamed low-level French politician would be to remind them that it's only because of the United States of America
Something
that
happened to the
French
Queen today?
are not speaking German right now. So they should be very grateful to our great country.
Hold on,
Kelly.
really? Hold on, wait. Let's hear what she said one more time.
Back. So is President Trump going to send the Statue of Liberty back to France?
Absolutely not. And my advice to that unnamed low-level French politician would be to remind them that it's only because of the United States of America that the French are not speaking German right now. So they should be very
Queen's today.
to our great country. Kelly.
Is
Queen
the
Latifah.
administration prepared to
Definitely not Queen
support
Latifah.
what it wants in terms of the time of the flights that departed, that went to El Salvador?
Could have been
and some of
clickbait,
those
yeah.
details that the judge is asking for in trying to determine the timing. Clearly, the 5 named individuals were not deported.
That's
in
right.
compliance. But looking more broadly, wanting to know about the timing of flights and so forth, because the verbal order did say turn around the flights if there's an issue. So is the administration prepared to provide that information?
I'm prepared to provide it right now. All of the planes that were
Yeah, and also, just as a caveat, like the French have been close allies of ours, even dating back to like the Revolution, because they helped us in the Revolution defend us from the British, right? So like the French helped us out during that period of time where we needed them the most. So France and the U.S. have been close for a long time. It's not just the like World War I and World War II that like we came to their aid when they were needed, or when they needed us and stuff like that. Like we've been close with the French even dating back to the Revolution of the United States. So, and obviously now we're close with Britain too. So
subject to the written order, the judge's written order, took off before the order was entered in the courtroom on Saturday. And the administration will, of course, be happily answering all of those questions that the judge poses in court later today.
And for people who have due process questions about making certain that there wasn't anyone who was swept up who did not meet the criteria that you laid out, is there a way for the administration to provide more detail about how that was determined, who the individuals were that met?
that's a full
this,
room right there.
Deportation order?
Yes, I can assure the American people that Customs and Border Patrol and ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are sure about the identities of the individuals who were on these planes and the threat that they pose to our homeland. They take this incredibly seriously. They are putting their lives on the line to deport these designated terrorists from our country, and they should be trusted to do that. And that's exactly what the American people elected this president to do.
Thanks, Caroline. Just to follow up on that then, so you're saying definitively that the administration can prove everyone that was put on those flights to El Salvador was either a member of Tren de Agua, MS-13, or some other entity?
We've already provided the breakdown in the effort of transparency about
Appreciate
the
that, Phil.
261 illegal aliens who were deported. 137 of those were deported under the Alien Enemies Act. 101 of those were Venezuelans removed via Title VIII, which, as you know, are just regular immigration proceedings. And 23 of them were MS-13 Salvadorian gang
My cat's
members.
name is
There were
Trigger.
also 2
This one.
MS-13 ringleaders as part of that group of 23 who President Bukele particularly expressed his gratitude for their return so he can demand justice in his home country. Jennifer.
What criteria, though, other than, say, tattoos or maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time, are they using to determine that someone is actually
there's
a
your
member of one
kitty.
of these organizations.
Intelligence and the men and women on the ground in the interior of our country who are
What's going
finally
on?
being allowed to do their jobs. Their hands were tied under the previous administration. And as I said, they take their jobs very seriously. They should be trusted and respected by the American public with this operation. And of course, as I said to Kelly, the administration will provide all details to the questions that the court poses. Jennifer.
One more
Yeah.
follow-up on that. Can you say how much the U.S. is
So what they're talking about right now is there's a judge. There's a judge. Yeah, so a federal judge on Saturday night attempted to temporarily block the president from removing immigrants under a wartime law known as the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 that the president announced earlier in the day that he was going to enforce. Despite the ruling, the 261 people, the numbers changed a lot, were deported to El Salvador on Saturday, 137 of whom were removed under the Alien Enemies Act over alleged gang ties. So, but when the plane had already landed and had already gotten to El Salvador at the time, so I don't know if like there's not real, I don't know what they can do about that in the meantime. It's like kind of already done. So, yeah. Anyway.
paying El Salvador to imprison these Venezuelans? And then a different question on Russia. I was wondering if you could give us an update on the ceasefire negotiations, and is there anything you can share on the list that Putin passed along to President Trump for the things he's requesting?
Sure. To your first question, it was approximately $6 million to El Salvador for the detention of these foreign terrorists. And I would point out that is pennies on the dollar in comparison to the cost of life and the cost it would impose on the American taxpayer to house these terrorists in maximum security prisons here in the United States of America. And I would echo the message of our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who expressed his gratitude to President Bukele and El Salvador's government for their cooperation in this deal. As for Russia, as you know, the president announced last night on Air Force One on his return from his very busy weekend in Florida that he will be speaking to President Putin tomorrow. I won't get ahead of those negotiations, but I can say we are on the 10th yard line of peace, and we've never been closer to a peace deal than we are in this moment.
What's up,
and
guys?
the president, as you know, is determined
Your
to get
kitty
one
is
done.
awesome.
Sure, Caitlin.
I have two questions.
Ethan.
One on the flights, but first on the president's post overnight, saying that that the pardons that were issued by President Biden preemptively to members of the January 6th committee, that they're now null and void. Have attorneys here at the White House told President Trump that he has the legal authority to undo
Strange times,
a pardon
indeed.
simply because it was signed by Autopen, as he said?
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions, Caitlin. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents. And so I think it's a question that
So what they're talking about right now is the all of the pardons that the previous administration issued, and there's like a I forget what it is, so President Trump is claiming that the former president's pardons are void, alleging that they were signed via Autopen. Yeah, he's saying that former President Joe Biden's pardons of lawmakers who served on the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th Capitol riot and others are void, alleging that they'd been signed via an Autopen and that the president did not even know about them. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what he's alleging. Let's see. In other words, the president did not sign them, but more importantly, he did not know anything about them. The necessary pardoning documents were not explained to or approved by him. according to the president. He continued in his post saying, therefore, those on the unselect committee who destroyed and deleted all evidence obtained during their 2-year witch hunt of me and many other innocent people should fully understand they are subject to investigation at the highest level. Yeah, so I think, let's see if I can find that.
It looked like we had an Autopen for a president, and we would have been better off if we had, probably. But it looks to me like, that's a big subject. I'm sure you won't ask about that, but the whole subject of Autopen, did he know what he was doing? Did he authorize it? Or is this somebody in an office, maybe a radical left lunatic, just signing whatever that person wants? That's not what it's all about. I never use it. I mean, we may use it as an example to send some young person a letter, because it's nice, we get thousands and thousands of letters and letters of support for young people, for people that aren't feeling well, etc. But to sign pardons and all of the things that he signed with an Autopen is disgraceful.
Yeah, I don't know.
Everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would propose perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent.
Is on the record talking about issuing preemptive pardons to these people.
But was he aware of his signature being used on every single pardon? That's a question you should ask the Biden White House.
Is there any evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?
You're a reporter. You should find out.
Okay,
Sean.
on the flights, so I have a question on the timeline of the flights. You keep talking about the judge's written order, which hit the docket Saturday night at about 7:26 p.m. But he issued a verbal order before that at about 6:45 and 6:48 p.m. based on the court hearing. A verbal order from the bench. Does the White House feel the need to comply with a verbal order?
Gorilla Patrick.
Again, as I said, all of the planes subject to the written order of this judge departed U.S. soil, U.S. territory before the judge's written order.
But what about the verbal order?
Okay, so yeah, the judge wrote that order and issued it out after they had already left the continental United States. And so I guess they continued with their flight and didn't turn back around after that.
Of course, carries the same legal weight as a written order, and said for the planes to turn around if they were.
Well,
in the air.
there's actually
Cat hair
questions
everywhere.
about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order, as a written order, and our lawyers are determined to ask and answer those questions in court. Sean.
Hey, so on Friday, the president suggested at length that it should be illegal to criticize judges, but he has repeatedly criticized judges who rule against him, and Elon Musk is calling for impeachment of judges who have opposed the administration. So how are those two things not in conflict?
I have not heard the president talk about impeaching judges. I know you mentioned Mr. Musk's tweet, but I have not heard the president of the United States ask that. Mary.
Hey, thanks, Caroline. I wanted to ask about this video that I saw this morning set to the tune of Closing Time about deportations of illegal migrants. What's the strategy behind the White House's videos they've been putting out on this, and can you kind of talk us through the thinking on these videos?
Sure. I think the White House and our entire government clearly is leaning into the message of this president. And we are unafraid to double down and to take responsibility and ownership of the serious decisions that are being made. The president was elected with an overwhelming mandate to launch the largest...
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible to impeach judges. I don't know how that works. That is out of my purview.
Mass deportation campaign in American history, and that's exactly what he is doing. And to this very day, we are now, I think, 56 or 7 days into the administration by my count. The president still receives an overwhelming public support for the policies that he is enacting. So we are unafraid to message effectively.
See, don't judges have to be tried by their peers to be kicked off? I don't know. I'm not 100% sure.
What the president is doing on a daily basis to make our communities safer. And the specific video you referenced, I think it sums up our immigration policy pretty well. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay.
Appreciate that, Eric.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. I have two questions. First, will President Trump put sanctions on Russia if the talks on Tuesday don't go as hoped? And secondly, have
Just
any
sitting
illegal
really
immigrants
still, probably.
self-deported through CBP home yet?
To your first question, it's something the president has floated, and certainly he's willing to do if necessary. I don't have anything to read out, and I would never get ahead of the president on such a serious decision. To your second question about the CBP Home app, I would have to check in with the Department of Homeland Security, but it's a great question, and we're very proud to repurpose this app, which the Biden administration abused to facilitate the mass illegal entry of illegal immigrants into our country. It was like a fast pass at Disneyland. That's not happening under this administration. We are encouraging illegal immigrants to actively self-deport to maybe save themselves from being in one of these fun videos. Sure. John, good to see you.
After President Trump strafe-bombed the Houthis yesterday, he said that if they retaliate, he was going to personally hold Iran accountable for that.
Oh yeah, that's another
accountable. What
big
would that
thing.
look like?
Hold on.
I would defer you to what the president put out this morning, John, where he said very clearly, I will read it, "Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks
Or
being
Instagram,
made
yeah.
by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, are all created by Iran. Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met
What's
with
up?
great force, and there is no guarantee that the force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they have..."
So the whole purpose of this rhetoric is because Iran is sponsoring the Houthis directly. They've been supporting the Houthis throughout the entire Yemeni civil war. And so anything that the Houthis do to impact global trade, global commerce, or impact, what's it called? Impact, freedom of navigation in the region. The president is saying that that is directly as a result of Iran. And it is a direct result of Iran because Iran's sponsoring the Houthis and enabling them to continue this behavior. So that's what they're bringing this up for.
Haven't lost control. They are dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money, and highly sophisticated military.
The thing I'm interested about is the fact that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates at one point were heavily involved in conducting not only support of the internationally recognized government of Yemen, not the Houthis, but the internationally recognized government that was there that was against the Houthis. And they were conducting airstrikes and humanitarian aid and all kinds of stuff. And I don't know what they've been doing since then, but I would imagine that it would probably be in the best interest of the Saudis to kind of get more involved, especially since Yemen's like their southern neighbor, so we'll see if they actually do that or not.
Military equipment and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from
Gorilla
the weapons
Patrick says
and
U.S.
leadership of
judges,
Iran.
including
And
Supreme
Iran
Court
will
justices,
held
can be
responsible
impeached.
and suffer the consequences,
Didn't know
and
that.
those consequences will be dire. That is a statement from the President of the United States just moments ago. I have nothing additional to share, but our message to Iran is you better take this president seriously, and I think the Houthis learned that the hard way this past weekend. As I said in my opening remarks, there's a new sheriff in town, and this president is not just going to sit on his hands and allow terrorists to launch attacks on commercial vessels and U.S. naval ships. Those
Wild
actions
times.
will not be tolerated. Sure, Edward.
Yeah, thanks. Caroline, on the economy. So after mostly a down week last week in the economy, you've been very vocal as well as other cabinet members about how we're in a transition and about how this economic transition, and there's a long-term plan for tariffs on this. How concerned is the president that the markets and Americans, for lack of a better term, will freak out over these tariffs and be concerned about
Hairline?
the long-term plan?
Sure. I think I've been asked
Whose
this question
hairline?
and answered this question respectfully, Edward. We are in a period of transition. The president has made that clear. He also has made his belief in tariffs and what they will do for our great country clear, restoring wealth back to our country. And if you look at the president's first-term economic formula, massive deregulation, tax cuts, lowering the cost of living with an energy boom, which the American people can expect soon. Wall Street and Main Street should both be assured by what President Trump did in his first term. It's the exact same formula.
Yeah.
In fact, I would argue.
So Game Central brings up a good point. The U.S. Navy was initially established to protect American merchant ships from the attacks by Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean. Yeah, the Barbary pirates. That was something that the United States Marine Corps was heavily involved in case you guys didn't know. Well, it was initially created to protect the colonies, but it also definitely was involved in protecting the Barbary pirates. Let's see. Yeah, so the Barbary states, Morocco, Tunis, Tripoli, Algiers, and North Africa, who raided ships and captured people for ransom or enslavement, particularly in the Mediterranean Sea during the 17th and 18th century. Yeah, the Barbary Wars. Yeah, so the Barbary states were a collection of North African states, many of which practiced state-supported piracy in order to exact tribute from weaker Atlantic powers. Morocco was an independent kingdom. Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli owned a loose allegiance to the Ottoman Empire. The United States fought two separate wars with Tripoli and Algiers in the early 1800s, although at other times it preferred to pay tribute to obtain the release of captives held in the Barbary states. Yeah, so I think that... see, prior to independence, the American colonists had enjoyed the protection of the British Navy. However, after they declared independence, British diplomats were quick to inform the Barbary states that the U.S. ships were open to attack. In 1785, Dey Mohammed of Algiers declared war on the United States and captured several American ships. The financially troubled Confederation government of the United States was unable to raise a navy or the tribute that would protect U.S. ships. In an attempt to address the challenge posed by Algiers, Thomas Jefferson, who's then the U.S. minister to France, attempted to build a coalition of weaker naval powers to defeat Algiers, was unsuccessful. The adoption of the Constitution in 1789 gave the U.S. government the power to levy taxes and raise and maintain armed forces, powers which had been lacking under the Articles of Confederation in 1794. In response to the Algerian seizures of American ships, Congress authorized construction of the first 6 ships of the U.S. Navy. In 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli, Yusuf Karamanli, citing late payments of tribute, demanded additional tribute and declared war on the United States. The United States successfully defeated his forces with a combined naval and land assault by the United States Marine Corps. The U.S. treaty with Tripoli concluded in 1805 included a ransom for American prisoners in Tripoli, but no provisions for tribute. Interesting. So yeah, like I said, the United States Marine Corps was heavily involved in the Barbary Wars.
Argue it's even better this time around. And if you look at some of the economic indicators in the last week, the latest CPI report last week beat expectations. Inflation is cooling. Core inflation dropped for the first time in 4 months. The national average of the price of gas is down 42 cents from 1 year ago.
From the halls of
And there was
Montezuma
also
to the
a new
shores of
report out
Tripoli.
this morning about
That's where they got it
wholesale
from.
egg prices. They continue to fall. A dozen eggs are now $3.10 cheaper since January 24th. First, that's a 47% decrease overall. So I think the American people do have great reason to be optimistic about this economy. And as I've said repeatedly, it continues to be true. The administration has a whole of government effort to fix the economic mess created by Biden.
So the president's pointed to that April 2nd tariff
History,
deadline,
yeah.
so to speak.
Should do a video
Is the
on that at some
tariff
point.
back and forth
I think that'd be
sort of done
good.
now?
Give people a little bit more insight why we have to the shores of Tripoli and our
I think the president will tell you that all options are always on the table, and he's always ready to respond if he feels the United States is being unfairly treated by our allies and also our competitors around the world. But yes, the April 2nd day is a big day for the country, as the president has said. Reciprocal tariffs will go into effect. We'll have more details on that as the date nears. But
the reciprocal
our entire
tariffs,
trade team,
April 2nd.
Secretary Lutnick, Secretary Bessent,
It's in a
the
couple
Vice
weeks.
President has been quite involved in these talks and discussions as well about what that will look like. And the president, as you always do, you will hear from him directly on it. Deborah Saunders, how are you?
Fine. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Former Pardon Attorney Elizabeth Boyer believes she was fired for refusing to sign off on a move to
She's kind of hard to hear.
actor notice. DOJ's Todd Blanche says no. But I want to know, is the administration dedicated to restoring gun rights to felons who served their times? I ask this because I've talked to people who were pardoned. They felt that was important. Of course, this
They're
isn't
talking about
necessarily
restoring gun rights to
What does the president
felons
think
who
about
earn
this issue?
or serve their time.
After your sentence, should you have gun rights?
It's an important question. It is one I have not spoken to the president about on his views, but I will take it to him this afternoon. I will tell him you asked, and we will get you an answer. You're welcome. Jonathan.
Thanks a lot, Carolina. A question for you regarding the administration complying with judges' orders. I want to ask about an administration spokesperson who's the border czar, Tom Homan. He was on Fox News.
We love Tom Homan.
And he was talking about the deportations, and he said the following.
Yeah.
He said, "We're not stopping.
Tom Homan was on Fox
I don't
earlier.
care
We'll look
what
at that
the
too."
Judges think," which seems to me, just reading that, that you don't care what orders come from the federal bench. Is that the case? Can you clarify that, please?
Well, I think since you
That's a
just
great
quoted
idea,
Tom,
Clipper.
I'll quote Tom. He said, I
Might
don't
do
care
that.
what the judges think, but I can assure you that the administration is complying with
Could
the
do the
court order.
funniest
And
thing
as I've
with
said
April 1st with
repeatedly
tariffs.
from this podium,
That's why he
all of
picked
the
April
flights that were
2nd.
subject to the judge's written order departed before the written order, and we are prepared to make that
Currently
case
at the
in
airport
court
to ship.
later this afternoon.
Any
Raymond.
words of advice?
If I could,
Move
on
fast,
Russia,
scream
President
loud, and
Biden
learn
of
everything you
Carolina
can
made
while
some
you're there.
remarks on Air Force One coming back from Florida, and he seemed to indicate that the conversation
Study as much as you
tomorrow
can.
concerns essentially dividing up assets,
They're
dividing
going to teach you everything you need to know.
associated with the war in Ukraine. Has President Zelensky given President Trump that authority? Is that what is going to take place tomorrow?
Well, as you know, the president and his entire national security team have been engaged directly with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian team, and that has been part of the discussion between the president's team and the Ukrainians. As for where those lines will be drawn or any specifics, I am not going to get into that from this podium. It would be unwise for me to get ahead of the president's call with President Putin tomorrow. But again, I can assure you,
Oh, the president's got a call with President Putin
President
tomorrow.
always does,
I
you
didn't
will
know
hear
that.
from him or one of us directly after that phone call tomorrow. Reagan.
Thank you, Caroline. There's a lot of focus on the judicial branch right now. The president has about 40 judicial appointments that he could make at this moment. Do you have an update on what the timeline would look like for those judicial appointments? And does the president have a list of potential nominees that he's vetting?
I do not have an update on a timeline, nor do I have a list, but I can certainly have our team gather that for you and provide it. You're welcome. Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline.
Sure.
Thank you, Caroline.
Go
So
ahead.
the president is visiting the community center this afternoon for a board meeting.
What's up, Elvira?
A question about what happened a few weeks ago. The Kennedy Center got bomb threats targeting a performance by Shingyun Performing Arts, which is an American company showcasing China before communism. This company has been targeted, unfortunately, by the CCP for years. I'm wondering if this administration has a response to this, and also as the president is putting an emphasis on arts and culture, what's the administration's message to potentially foreign state actors who are trying to disrupt that in the U.S.?
Don't disrupt it. This administration will take that very seriously and hold you accountable. We obviously condemn any violence or threats of violence against American institutions. And the president will be traveling to the Kennedy Center later this afternoon. I look forward to going with him. As you know, he is now the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center, where he hopes to restore arts and culture that embrace American tradition, don't disparage it, as we have unfortunately seen over the past several years. The president will be doing a tour of the center. In his business developer mind, I'm sure he will make some recommendations on how the center itself can be improved, but also we'll be discussing perhaps some future plays and musicals and theatrical programs that the center will be hosting under his new leadership and the board's new leadership. Daniel.
Will the president be discussing with Putin tomorrow the future of Volodymyr Zelensky? Sort of a follow-up to John's question.
Again, I've been asked and answered this question now. I'm not going to get ahead of the president's discussion tomorrow, but after the phone call takes place, I can certainly provide a readout. Daniel.
Caroline, thank you so much. You mentioned earlier in the briefing that you guys are at the 10-yard line of peace. Given the amount of progress that you've made in such a short amount of time, is that an indictment of the previous administration's foreign policy stance, and is it just more proof that you need to talk to people to sort of get things done?
I think so. I think the previous administration is the reason this war began. As President Trump often says, this war would have never started if he were still in office. It only started because of the incompetence and the weakness of the previous administration. And President Trump is very proud of the progress that he and his team have made in such a short amount of time. And hopefully tomorrow that progress will move forward.
I did sleep good.
Sure.
Thanks.
Or I slept well.
There have been some media reports just in the last few hours that the administration has decided to withdraw from the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine, which is designed to hold Putin accountable for war crimes. Are you able to confirm that? And if that has occurred, why has that occurred?
I'm not able to confirm it because I have not heard that. I will caution, I know there have been many inaccurate and misleading reports from Reuters lately, so I would caution anybody taking that seriously, but I can check in and get back to you. Rachel.
Caroline. Is it the president's belief that the Justice Department should be investigating members of the January 6th Select Committee? Is he directing the DOJ to do that?
As the president made it very clear in his address on Friday, I believe some of you were there, I was there, he made his vision for what he would like to see of the Department of Justice very clear, but he said that he has appointed great people in Attorney General Pam Bondi and also in our FBI Director Kash Patel to do what they think is best for our justice system and to stop the weaponization of justice that we saw under the previous administration against not just President Trump but his supporters as well. We want to restore the Department of Justice to an institution that focuses on
That's going to be
fighting law
a
and
big
order
job.
and crime and putting real criminals behind bars, not targeting Americans because of their religion or their political speech. We saw that under the previous administration, and it's unacceptable to this president.
And just to follow up really quickly on just Holman's comments from earlier, a few weeks ago in the Oval Office, the president said he
Seek
will
a
always
second
abide
opinion.
by the courts. We heard
Yeah, it's always good to seek multiple opinions if you're looking at op-eds and stuff like that, just to get like a varied, nuanced approach, because life is nuanced, right?
what Tom Homan said earlier today. So I'm only asking just to be clear for the American people. It is the administration's belief that that you feel like you are bound to comply by the judge's orders.
We are complying with the judge's orders.
I love the thick boy kitty.
What role does the president see for FEMA with these?
That was a loud
storms?
meow, I know.
FEMA, states handling their own disasters. Does he plan to change how the federal government responds to these storms?
There hasn't been a change yet. That doesn't mean there couldn't be in the future. But as of right now, the president, the entire administration are actively monitoring the storms, as I said. In fact, before I came down here, there was an email note in my inbox from the Department of Homeland Security
on
what they are actually doing state by state across the board. So rest assured, Secretary Noem and her team is on it, and I would defer you to the Department of Homeland Security for any further details.
One more question. The president referenced power plants with a conversation with Vladimir Putin. What is he referring to with power plants? What is that?
There's a power plant that is on the border of Russia and Ukraine that was up for discussion with the Ukrainians, and he will address it in his call with Putin.
Do I find it difficult to own pets in the military? I would say that if you own a dog, it's definitely going to be harder for sure. Cats are pretty easy because you can leave a cat at home all day and like they have a litter box and they've got like an automatic food feeder and like a water thing that dispenses water over and over again. So that's a little bit easier, but dogs, you have to like walk, on a regular basis. So it's a little harder to have a dog if you don't have somebody that's like a stay-at-home person, like either a spouse or a girlfriend, boyfriend, or whatever. That's a little harder. So, but I mean, it's just another thing to overcome, really.
Putin tomorrow.
The nuclear plant.
Correct.
Cats are basically roommates. Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you if you would be releasing more granular data about the people who were sent to El Salvador this week. Particularly, will you be releasing their names?
I don't believe so because of the privacy concerns at this point in time. That doesn't mean we won't eventually. I would defer you to the Department of Homeland
cats are pretty
Security for
calming.
more details on the individuals on the flights. But we have been incredibly transparent in giving you the breakdown of the numbers and
Take
also
your
some
dog
of the crimes
TDY.
committed by these heinous criminals and individuals. Kidnapping, sexual abuse of a child, robbery, aggravated assault on a police officer. I would remind everybody in this room that Tren de Aragua is a foreign terrorist organization operating within the United States of America because the previous administration allowed them to invade our country. These are monsters who tortured, raped, and murdered a 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungre. They murdered 22-year-old nursing student Laken Riley. They led a multi-state sex trafficking operation involving smuggling women into the United States, holding them in stash houses in Louisiana, Florida, New Jersey, Texas, and Virginia,
That's
and
horrible.
forcing them into prostitution. And they kidnapped and murdered
What's
a
going on?
33-year-old woman in Texas. They sexually and physically assaulted a woman and her daughter in Wisconsin. They conducted a mass shooting in Illinois. They peddled untraceable ghost guns across New York City, took over
Jesus,
an Aurora,
dude.
Colorado apartment complex where they kidnapped and tortured victims. And by the way, many of you in the mainstream media said that didn't happen. It turned out that it did. And because of the effective immigration policies of this administration, those foreign terrorists were detained and they are no longer operating on American soil. And we have President Trump to thank for that. We'll see you guys later at the Kennedy Center. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's a load. That's a whole load of stuff. There's a lot. I don't know. I didn't know a lot of the charges. There's a lot of charges against those guys. Crazy.